My controlling mill crashed my job interview. Months later she tried to kidnap my son. I never thought my mother-in-law would try to ruin my life. But looking back now, the signs were there from the very beginning. I'm a 29-year-old woman living in Ohio with my husband Jake and our 4-year-old son Noah. For the first few years of our marriage, things were normal. Not perfect, but normal enough that I thought I was lucky. Then there was my mother-in-law, Linda. Linda had one personality trait that overshadowed everything else. Control. She didn't just like being involved in our lives. She believed she had the right to run them. At first, I thought she was just an overly caring mom. Now I know better. Jake and I met in college. He was studying IT and I was working toward a degree in marketing. We started dating during our sophomore year, and by the time we graduated we were inseparable. Jake was kind, calm, and supportive. The kind of person who avoided arguments and tried to see the best in everyone. But he had one weakness. His mother. Jake was Linda's only child, and she treated him less like an adult and more like something she needed to protect, or possess. The first time I met Linda, she smiled politely. But I could feel the judgment behind her eyes. She looked me up and down like I was a product she was considering returning. Later that night Jake said something that should have been my first warning. Mom just needs time to warm up to people. I laughed it off. I didn't realize that meant years. At first Linda's interference in our lives was small. Little comments, little opinions, little boundaries crossed, by accident. When Jake and I moved into our first apartment together, she insisted on helping us decorate. I thought it was sweet. I figured that was normal. Except she didn't ask what we liked. She just showed up with furniture. A couch, a coffee table, curtains, all things we didn't choose. When I politely suggested we wanted to pick our own furniture, she laughed. "Oh sweetheart," she said. "You'll thank me later. I have better taste." Jake didn't say anything. That became the pattern. Linda would push. I would hesitate. Jake would stay quiet. And somehow Linda always got her way. Things got worse when Jake proposed. I was thrilled. Linda was not. She didn't say it directly, but it was obvious she didn't think I was good enough for her son. During wedding planning she tried to control everything. The venue, the dress, the guest list. At one point she even suggested Jake should invite his ex-girlfriend because she was still part of the family. I remember staring at her, thinking she had to be joking. She wasn't. Jake eventually told her no, but it took weeks of arguments before she backed down. And even on the wedding day she managed to make it about herself. She wore white, not off-white, not cream, white. When I confronted her about it, she smiled sweetly. "Oh honey," she said. "It's just a coincidence." It wasn't, but I told myself it was just wedding stress. I kept making excuses for her. That was my mistake. Everything changed when our son Noah was born. Linda became obsessed. At first it looked like excitement. She wanted to visit constantly. She brought toys, clothes, blankets. But then the comments started. "You're holding him wrong. You shouldn't feed him that. Why are you doing it that way?" No matter what I did, it was wrong. And if I disagreed with her, she would complain to Jake. "She's shutting me out. She doesn't let me see my grandson." Jake hated conflict, so his solution was always the same. Just let her help. But it wasn't help. It was control. When Noah turned 1, childcare became expensive. Jake suggested something. "Maybe you could stay home for a while." Financially it made sense. So, I left my marketing job and became a stay-at-home mom. Linda loved that idea, or at least I thought she did. What I didn't realize was that staying home made me more dependent, more vulnerable, and easier for her to manipulate. Once I stopped working, Linda's attitude toward me shifted. She started acting like I was useless. "Oh, you're home all day and the house still looks like this." I raised Jake while working full-time. Some women are just naturally organized. Every visit turned into criticism. My cooking, my parenting, my cleaning, nothing was ever good enough. Jake still tried to keep the peace. Mom doesn't mean it like that. But she absolutely did. After 3 years of being home with Noah, I started feeling like I'd lost myself. I loved being a mom, but I missed having something that belonged to me. A career, independence, a life outside the house. So I started applying for jobs again. Just part-time marketing roles. Nothing extreme. I didn't even tell Linda. I knew exactly how she would react. Or at least I thought I did. 2 weeks later, I finally got a call back. A small marketing agency downtown wanted to interview me. I was nervous but excited. Jake agreed to watch Noah that morning. Everything seemed perfect. The interview was scheduled for 10 in the morning. I showed up early, dressed professionally for the first time in years. The receptionist asked me to wait in the lobby. My heart was pounding. This felt like the first step toward getting my life back. Then the front doors slammed open. I turned around, and my stomach dropped. Linda was standing there. She looked like she had rushed inside. Her eyes locked onto me immediately. And then she said loudly enough for the entire lobby to hear. "There you are." My mind went blank. "How did you?" Before I could finish, she marched across the lobby. And then she said something that made everyone turn and stare. You are not abandoning your son just to chase some stupid job. The entire room went silent. People were staring, the receptionist, 2 employees walking by, even the office manager who was supposed to interview me. I felt my face burning with embarrassment. Linda, I whispered, what are you doing here? She crossed her arms. I came to stop you from making the biggest mistake of your life. I tried to stay calm. This is my interview. You need to leave. She laughed. Actually laughed. Oh please, she said loudly. You think you can balance a job and being a mother? You can barely handle one. Someone behind the desk cleared their throat. Ma'am, you can't cause a disturbance here. Linda ignored them. She stepped closer to me. You belong at home with Noah, she hissed. Not pretending to be a career woman. The office manager finally stepped forward. Is everything okay here? I opened my mouth, but before I could answer, Linda spoke again. No, she said sharply. It's not okay. My daughter-in-law is neglecting her child for this nonsense. I felt like the floor was disappearing under my feet. The interview was obviously over before it even started. Linda had destroyed it, and she didn't even look sorry. She looked satisfied. I left the building shaking with humiliation. Linda followed me out into the parking lot. You'll thank me later, she said calmly. I saved you from embarrassing yourself. Something inside me finally cracked. For the first time in years, I looked her directly in the eye. You had no right. Her smile disappeared. Oh sweetheart, she said coldly. I have every right when it comes to my grandson. At the time, I thought this was the worst thing she could ever do. I was wrong, because over the next few months, Linda's obsession with controlling my life would get worse. Much worse, until the day she tried to take my son from daycare, and that was the moment everything changed. I sat in my car for almost 15 minutes after leaving that office building. My hands were shaking so badly I couldn't even start the engine. The entire scene kept replaying in my head. The lobby, the staring faces, the office manager looking confused and uncomfortable while my mother-in-law loudly accused me of neglecting my child. I had spent years building my confidence in my career before Noah was born. I used to walk into meetings and presentations without feeling nervous. But that day, sitting in that parking lot, I felt small. Embarrassed, powerless. Eventually I managed to calm down enough to drive home. Jake was in the living room when I walked in, sitting on the couch with Noah watching cartoons. He looked up and immediately frowned. You're back already. I forced a small smile and kissed Noah on the head before he ran back to his show. The interview didn't really happen. Jake looked confused. What do you mean? I dropped my purse on the kitchen counter and took a deep breath. Your mom showed up. Jake blinked. What? She came into the office lobby and started yelling at me about abandoning Noah to chase a career. Jake stared at me like he didn't quite believe what he was hearing. Wait, what? She caused a whole scene, Jake. In front of everyone. He rubbed his face slowly, clearly trying to process it. How did she even know about the interview? That was the same question I had been asking myself the entire drive home. I didn't tell her, I said. Did you? Jake shook his head immediately. No. For a moment we both sat there in silence. Then Jake sighed. Well, maybe someone told her. I felt frustration rising in my chest. Who would tell her? I barely told anyone. Jake stood up and paced a little. Maybe she was just worried. I stared at him. Worried. Jake hesitated. You know how she is about Noah. That answer made something inside me snap. She humiliated me in front of a potential employer, Jake. I know, he said quickly. I'm not saying it's okay. But the tone of his voice didn't sound angry. It sounded like he was trying to make excuses. Again, that familiar sentence came out of his mouth. She was probably just trying to help. I laughed, not because it was funny. Because I couldn't believe he had said it again. Help. Jake looked uncomfortable. I'll talk to her. I had heard that promise before too. And somehow nothing ever changed. That night I kept thinking about the one question that didn't make sense. How did Linda know about the interview? The next morning I opened my laptop to check my email. There were 2 new messages. The first one made my stomach drop. It was from the marketing agency. They were thanking me for coming in but said they had decided to move forward with another candidate. Which basically meant the interview was officially over. Before it even started, I closed the email slowly. Then I saw the second message. It was from Linda. Just seeing her name made my chest tighten. I opened it. The message was short. Just wanted to say I hope you're not upset about yesterday. Sometimes people need someone to step in before they make bad decisions. Noah needs his mother at home, not chasing a job. I read the message twice. There was no apology, not even a hint of regret. Just that same belief that she had the right to control my life. I closed the laptop and sat there staring at the wall. That was when I started realizing something. Linda didn't think she had done anything wrong. To her, what happened yesterday was completely justified. Later that afternoon Jake told me he had spoken to her. How did that go? I asked. He hesitated. She said she heard about the interview from someone at church. That made no sense. We didn't go to the same church as Linda. In fact, we barely went at all. So someone from church just randomly knew about my interview. I asked, Jake shrugged. That's what she said. The answer felt wrong, but I didn't push further. I was already exhausted. Over the next few weeks, Linda started visiting more often than usual. At first it seemed normal. She would come by with groceries or toys for Noah. But something about her behavior felt different. Like she was watching me. Evaluating me. One afternoon she arrived while I was cooking lunch. She walked into the kitchen and looked around slowly. So, she said casually. Any more job interviews planned? I froze. No, she smiled slightly. That's good. The way she said it made my skin crawl. I'm sure the agency realized pretty quickly that you weren't the right fit. I turned around slowly. Why would you say that? She shrugged. Just being realistic. I didn't respond, but inside I was boiling. That night I checked my email again. And that's when I saw something strange. One of my job applications had been opened, and then withdrawn. But I hadn't withdrawn it. At first I thought it was a glitch. Until I noticed something else. Several of my applications had been opened within minutes of each other. All from the same IP location. And then suddenly it hit me. Someone had access to my email. My heart started racing. I checked the login history. And the location listed for those logins was only about 5 miles away. Which happened to be exactly where Linda lived. My stomach dropped. The next day I changed my password immediately. But the realization stayed with me. Linda hadn't just ruined one interview. She had been watching, monitoring, maybe even sabotaging my job search the entire time. When Jake came home that evening, I showed him the login records. He stared at the screen for a long moment. You think my mom hacked your email? I think she somehow got access to it. Jake rubbed the back of his neck. That seems extreme, I said. She literally showed up at my interview to stop me from working. Jake didn't answer, but the silence told me everything. Part of him still didn't want to believe his mother was capable of something like that. Over the next month I stopped applying for jobs. Not because I wanted to. Because I felt like someone was constantly watching. Linda kept visiting, and every time she did, she made small comments that made it clear she was happy with the situation. Noah needs you here. Some women just aren't meant for careers. You're lucky Jake works hard enough that you don't have to worry about money. Each comment chipped away at my confidence. Until one afternoon something happened that changed everything. Jake had just enrolled Noah in a small local daycare program. Only part-time, just a few mornings a week. The idea was to help Noah socialize with other kids. Linda hated the idea immediately. Why would you send him to daycare when you're home all day? She demanded. It's just a few hours, Jake said. It's good for him. Linda didn't argue much after that. But the look on her face told me she wasn't happy. 3 weeks later I got a call from the daycare. The woman on the phone sounded confused. Hi, I just wanted to check something with you. What is it? I asked. There was a woman here earlier today asking to pick up Noah. My heart skipped. What woman? She said she was his grandmother. My stomach dropped instantly, because I already knew exactly who that woman was. And that was the moment I realized Linda's obsession wasn't just about controlling my life anymore. Now she was starting to cross a much more dangerous line. When the daycare teacher finished speaking, I felt my entire body go cold. A woman came to pick him up. I repeated slowly. Yes, she said, but don't worry, we didn't release him. She wasn't on the approved pickup list. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Was it, Linda? There was a small pause. I believe that's the name she used, yes. My stomach twisted. What exactly happened? I asked. The teacher explained that Linda had shown up at the front desk around noon. Noah wasn't scheduled to be picked up until 2, but Linda insisted she was there to take him home early. She said you had a headache and asked her to grab him, the teacher said. I gripped the edge of the kitchen counter. I never said that. That's what we thought, the teacher replied gently. Because you didn't call ahead. Apparently Linda had tried to argue with the staff when they refused to release Noah. She kept insisting she was his grandmother and that they had no right to keep her from him. Eventually the daycare director had stepped in and told her that unless she was on the official pickup list, they couldn't release Noah to her. That's when she left, the teacher said. I could barely speak. Thank you for calling me. After we hung up, I just stood there staring at the wall. Linda had tried to take my son. Without asking, without telling me, and she had lied to the daycare staff to do it. When Jake came home that evening, I told him everything. At first he looked confused. Then frustrated. Then he sighed. Mom probably just wanted to spend time with him. I stared at him in disbelief. She lied to the daycare, Jake. She probably thought it wasn't a big deal. I felt anger rising in my chest. She told them I had a headache and asked her to pick him up. Jake rubbed his forehead. I'll talk to her. There it was again. That same promise. But something about this situation felt different. Because this time it wasn't just about me. It was about Noah. Later that night Jake called his mother while I was in the kitchen. I could hear most of the conversation from the living room. Mom, did you go to Noah's daycare today? There was a pause. Then Jake said, why would you do that without asking us? Another pause. Jake sighed again. Mom, that's not the point. He listened for a few seconds before speaking again. No, the daycare didn't overreact. His voice was calm but tired. After a minute he hung up. What did she say? I asked. Jake shrugged. She just wanted to surprise Noah by lying to the daycare. She said they misunderstood. I felt my patience finally running out. Jake, she said I told her to pick him up. She probably just said that so they wouldn't question her. That's exactly the problem. Jake looked uncomfortable. I told her not to do it again. That was it. No real consequences. No real boundaries. Just a casual, don't do it again. Over the next week I tried to convince myself it had just been a misunderstanding. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. Linda didn't misunderstand anything. She just believed the rules didn't apply to her. A few days later I picked Noah up from daycare early. As we were walking to the car, one of the teachers approached me. Can I ask you something? She said. Of course. She lowered her voice slightly. Your mother-in-law called again yesterday. My stomach dropped. She what? She was asking what days Noah attends daycare and what time pickup usually is. I felt a chill run through me. What did you tell her? Nothing, the teacher said quickly. We told her we couldn't share that information. I nodded slowly, but my mind was racing. Why would Linda need to know Noah's schedule? That night I told Jake again. This time even he looked concerned. She called the daycare, yes, and asked about Noah's schedule. Jake frowned. That's weird. I crossed my arms. Exactly. Jake was quiet for a long moment. I'll talk to her again. But the problem was becoming obvious. Talking to Linda wasn't solving anything. The next few weeks were tense. Linda kept visiting, but her behavior had changed slightly. She seemed colder toward me, almost like she was angry. One afternoon she sat on the couch while Noah played on the floor with his toy cars. You know, she said casually, children shouldn't spend so much time in daycare. It's only a few mornings a week, I replied. They need family, she continued. They need their grandmother. I didn't respond. She watched Noah quietly for a moment. Then she said something that made my stomach twist. You wouldn't even need daycare if you weren't always thinking about working again. I looked at her sharply. I'm not applying for jobs right now. She smiled faintly. That's good. Something about the way she said it made me uneasy. A few days later something strange happened. I was folding laundry in the living room when I noticed my laptop sitting on the coffee table. I hadn't used it all morning, but the screen was on. I walked over slowly. My email inbox was open. At first I thought I must have forgotten to close it earlier. But then I saw something that made my heart start pounding. Another job application had been withdrawn. And this time I was absolutely sure I hadn't done it. The timestamp showed it had happened less than 10 minutes ago. I slowly looked toward the kitchen. Linda was standing at the sink washing her hands. She turned around and smiled. Oh good, you're done with the laundry. I stared at her. Did you use my laptop? She blinked. Why would I do that? My email was open. She shrugged. Maybe you forgot to close it. I didn't say anything, but the feeling in my stomach told me exactly what had happened. Later that evening, after she left, I checked the login history again. And just like before, the access location pointed to Linda's neighborhood. That was the moment I realized something. This wasn't just about her disliking me. This wasn't just about her wanting control. Linda was actively sabotaging my life. And she didn't care if I knew it. But the most disturbing part was what she said right before leaving that afternoon. She hugged Noah goodbye and then looked at me. You know, she said softly, sometimes mothers make choices that aren't best for their children. I frowned. What does that mean? She smiled. It just means someone has to make the right choices for them. At the time, I didn't fully understand what she meant. But a week later, I would. The week after Linda's strange comment felt tense in a way I couldn't quite explain. Nothing dramatic happened right away. But I constantly felt like something was about to. Like the air before a storm. I started double-checking everything. My email passwords, my laptop, even the locks on the doors before going to bed. Part of me wondered if I was overreacting. Maybe Linda really was just being pushy and intrusive like she always had been. But another part of me couldn't ignore the pattern that was forming. First the job interview, then the email interference, then showing up at the daycare, then calling them again asking about Noah's schedule. Every step felt like she was pushing a little further. And I had a horrible feeling she wasn't done yet. One Tuesday morning I dropped Noah off at daycare like usual. He ran inside happily with his little backpack bouncing behind him. The moment he disappeared into the classroom, I felt that familiar mix of emotions. Relief because I had a few quiet hours. And guilt because mothers are somehow supposed to feel bad about enjoying a break. I sat in the car for a moment before driving home. For the first time in weeks, the house felt quiet. I made coffee and tried to relax. Around 10:30 my phone buzzed. It was the daycare. My stomach immediately tightened. Hello. The director's voice sounded calm but serious. Hi, I just wanted to check in with you about something. My heart started beating faster. What happened? There's a woman here again asking about Noah. My fingers tightened around the phone. Linda, yes. I closed my eyes. What is she doing there? She says she just wants to visit him. I took a deep breath. She can't. That's what we told her, the director said. But she's being persistent. In the background I could hear muffled voices. One of them was Linda's. Even through the phone I recognized her sharp tone. I'm his grandmother, she was saying loudly. The director spoke again. She's insisting that family members should be allowed to see him. She's not authorized, I said firmly. I understand, the director replied. Don't worry, we're not letting her inside the classroom. I felt a mixture of anger and embarrassment. Thank you for handling it. When we hung up, I just stood in the kitchen staring at the wall again. This was the second time she had shown up there. The second time she had tried to get access to Noah without telling us. When Jake came home that evening, I told him everything. This time he didn't try to defend her right away. She went there again, he asked slowly. Yes. Jake sat down heavily on the couch. That's not okay. Finally, that's what I've been saying, I replied. Jake rubbed his temples. I'll call her. The conversation lasted longer this time. I couldn't hear everything, but Jake's voice sounded more serious than usual. No, Mom, you can't just show up there. Pause. That's not the point. Another pause. You need to respect boundaries. When he hung up, he looked tired. She says she was just in the area. I laughed bitterly. She lives 20 minutes away. Jake didn't argue, but the next few days were quiet. Linda didn't visit. She didn't call. And strangely, that silence made me even more nervous. Then Friday afternoon came. I arrived at daycare a few minutes early to pick up Noah. The kids were outside playing on the small playground behind the building. Noah spotted me immediately and ran over. Mommy, I scooped him up and hugged him. How was your day? We painted dinosaurs, he said excitedly. I smiled and grabbed his backpack. But as we walked toward the parking lot, one of the teachers approached me. Hey, can I talk to you for a second? Her expression looked uneasy. Of course, she glanced around before speaking. Your mother-in-law came by again yesterday. My heart sank. What did she do this time? She didn't try to pick him up, the teacher said. She just sat in the parking lot for a while. I blinked. What? She stayed in her car and watched the playground. A chill ran through my body. How long? About 40 minutes. I felt my stomach drop. And then she left. I forced a smile, thanked the teacher, and walked Noah to the car. But inside my head, alarms were going off. Watching the playground. Why would she do that? That night I told Jake again. He looked more unsettled this time. She sat there watching. Yes. Jake shook his head. That's weird. We sat in silence for a moment. Then Jake said something that surprised me. Maybe we should take a break from letting her see Noah for a while. I looked at him carefully. You mean that? I just think she needs to calm down. It wasn't a full boundary. But it was something. For the next 2 weeks we didn't see Linda at all. No visits. No phone calls. Nothing. At first it felt like peace. But slowly that peace started feeling more like quiet before something worse. Then one Monday morning I got another call from the daycare. This time the director sounded more serious than ever. Hi, I need to ask you something important. My chest tightened. What is it? There was a woman here earlier today claiming she had permission to pick Noah up. My heart started racing again. Was it Linda? Yes. I closed my eyes. What did she say this time? The director hesitated before answering. She told us you and Jake were getting divorced, and that she was taking Noah to stay with her. For a moment I couldn't even speak. Because that wasn't just crossing a line anymore. That was something else entirely. And I had a terrifying feeling that Linda wasn't just interfering with our lives anymore. She was starting to create her own version of reality. For a few seconds after the daycare director told me what Linda had said, I couldn't even speak. She told you, we're getting divorced. I finally managed. Yes, the director said carefully. She said the situation at home had become unstable and that she had permission to pick Noah up and take him to stay with her. My hand started shaking around the phone. That's not true. I assumed it wasn't, the director replied. That's why we called you immediately. I took a slow breath, trying to calm the panic rising in my chest. Did she cause a scene? She was very insistent, the director admitted. But once we told her we needed direct confirmation from you or your husband, she left. Thank you for not releasing him. Of course, but I think we should update Noah's file to make things very clear. What do you mean? We can add a note that only you and Jake are authorized for pickup unless you personally notify us ahead of time. That would be good, I said quickly. After we hung up, I just sat at the kitchen table staring at my phone. This was getting worse, much worse. Showing up once might have been a mistake. Twice could have been stubbornness. But lying to the daycare about a divorce just to get access to my son. That was something else. When Jake got home that evening, I didn't ease into the conversation. I told him immediately. She told the daycare we're getting divorced, I said. Jake stopped halfway through taking off his jacket. What? She said she had permission to take Noah because things were unstable at home. Jake's face went pale. She actually said that. Yes. For the first time since all this started, Jake looked genuinely angry. He grabbed his phone. I'm calling her, He walked into the other room, but his voice quickly got loud enough that I could hear everything anyway. Mom, what the hell is going on? Pause. No, don't pretend you don't know what I'm talking about. Another pause. You went to Noah's daycare and told them we were getting divorced. The silence that followed lasted almost 10 seconds. Then Jake's voice got sharper. That's not your decision to make. More silence. I could hear Linda speaking faintly through the phone, but I couldn't make out the words. Jake ran a hand through his hair. No, Mom, that's not the point. Another long pause. Finally Jake said something that surprised me. You're not allowed to go to the daycare anymore. There was a burst of loud talking from the other end of the phone. Jake pulled the phone slightly away from his ear. Yes, I'm serious. Another pause. No, you're not protecting Noah. You're causing problems. The conversation ended shortly after that. Jake came back into the living room looking exhausted. What did she say? I asked. He sat down heavily on the couch. She thinks you're unstable. I blinked. What? She says you've been acting strange since you tried to go back to work. I stared at him. She's been sabotaging my job search. I know, Jake said quietly. She says you're stressed and making bad decisions. And she thinks lying to the daycare is normal. Jake didn't answer. For the first time, I could see the doubt in his face. Not about me, about his mother. That night I barely slept. My mind kept replaying everything that had happened over the last few months. The interview, the emails, the daycare visits, the lies. Each step felt like Linda was trying to slowly push me out of my own life. The next morning, Jake and I both went to the daycare together. We spoke directly with the director in her office. I'm really sorry you're dealing with this, she said kindly. We just want to make sure Noah is safe. She showed us the updated file. Only 3 people were listed for pickup. Me, Jake, and Jake's sister, Emily, who lived 2 hours away and rarely visited. Linda's name was specifically listed under a note that said not authorized for pickup under any circumstances. Seeing that written down made everything feel strangely real. Jake signed the paperwork while I watched. As we were leaving, the director added one more thing. If she comes back again, we may have to consider contacting the police. The word police made my stomach twist. But at the same time, part of me felt relieved. Because maybe that was exactly what needed to happen. For the next week, things were quiet again. Linda didn't call. She didn't visit. She didn't show up anywhere. Jake said she was probably just angry after their argument. But something about the silence still felt wrong. Then the following Thursday afternoon, I got another call from the daycare. This time the teacher sounded nervous. Hi, I just wanted to let you know something. My heart started racing again. What is it? There's a car parked across the street from the playground. And it's been there almost every day this week. A cold feeling spread through my chest. Do you know whose car it is? Yes. The teacher hesitated. It belongs to your mother-in-law. I closed my eyes. She's just sitting there. Yes. Is she trying to come inside? No, she just watches the kids play. The words made my stomach twist. How long has this been happening? Since Monday. 4 days. Linda had been sitting outside the daycare watching the playground for 4 days. I thanked the teacher and hung up slowly. Then I walked to the living room window and stared outside. Because suddenly I had a horrible realization. Linda wasn't just trying to interfere anymore. She was studying the routine, watching the schedule, waiting for something, and deep down I had a terrible feeling about what that something might be. For the rest of that afternoon I couldn't focus on anything. The image kept replaying in my mind. Linda sitting in her car across the street from the daycare, watching the playground. Watching the kids, watching Noah. It wasn't just intrusive anymore. It felt calculated. When Jake came home that evening, I told him immediately. She's been sitting outside the daycare all week, I said. Jake looked confused. What do you mean sitting outside? She parks across the street and watches the playground. His expression slowly changed from confusion to concern. How long? Since Monday. Jake ran his hands through his hair. That's not normal. No, I said quietly. It's not. Jake grabbed his phone. I'm calling her. This time the call didn't last very long. What are you doing at Noah's daycare? Pause. No, Mom, don't lie. Jake's jaw tightened. They saw your car there. Another pause. When Jake spoke again, his voice sounded sharper than I'd ever heard it before. You're not allowed to do that. He listened for a few seconds. Then he said something that made my stomach twist. No, you're not protecting him. Another pause. Then Jake said firmly, if you keep doing this, we're going to have to involve the police. He hung up a moment later. What did she say? I asked. Jake sat down heavily on the couch. She says she was just making sure Noah was safe. From what? She says daycares can't be trusted. I let out a frustrated breath. So instead she spies on them from a parking lot. Jake didn't respond, but I could tell he was starting to realize how serious this was becoming. The next morning I dropped Noah off at daycare like usual. But this time I parked for a minute before leaving. And sure enough, about 10 minutes later, a familiar gray sedan pulled up across the street. Linda's car. My chest tightened as I watched her through the windshield. She sat there quietly, looking toward the playground. She didn't notice me parked down the road. I watched her for almost 5 minutes before finally driving away. When I picked Noah up that afternoon, the daycare director asked if she could speak with me again. "We've noticed the same car several times this week," she said gently. "Yes," I replied. "It's my mother-in-law." The director sighed. "That's what we suspected. She hasn't tried to come inside again." "No," the director said. "But watching the playground like that makes some of the staff uncomfortable." "I understand." She leaned forward slightly. "If it continues, we may need to contact the police for trespassing or suspicious behavior." Hearing that made my stomach knot. But at the same time, part of me felt relieved someone else was acknowledging how strange this situation had become. That evening Jake and I decided something had to change. "We can't keep pretending this is normal," I said. Jake nodded. "I know." For the first time since this started, he looked genuinely worried. "I think we need to set real boundaries." "What kind of boundaries?" Jake took a deep breath. "Mom doesn't see Noah for a while." I looked at him carefully. "You mean that?" "Yes. And if she keeps showing up at daycare?" Jake hesitated. "Then we do what the director suggested." "The police." Jake nodded slowly. "I don't want it to get that far, but if it has to, then it has to." The next day Jake called Linda again. This conversation was longer, and much louder. Even from the kitchen I could hear parts of it. "You are not allowed to go near the daycare anymore." Pause. "No, Mom, that's not up for discussion." Another pause. Then Jake said something that surprised me. "If you keep doing this, you're not going to see Noah at all." There was a long stretch of silence. Then Jake ended the call. "She's furious," he said afterward. "But she knows. We're serious now." For a few days, things were quiet again. No car across the street. No phone calls. No surprise visits. For the first time in weeks, I started to relax a little. Maybe Jake finally standing up to her had worked. Maybe she realized she had gone too far. But that feeling didn't last long. Because the following Tuesday, something happened that made everything worse. I was at home folding laundry when my phone rang. It was the daycare again. But this time the teacher sounded panicked. "Hi, we need you to come here right now." My heart started pounding. What happened? There was an incident. What kind of incident? There was a pause before she answered. "Your mother-in-law tried to take Noah." My entire body went cold. "What? She came to the playground during outdoor time." My hands started shaking. How did she even get inside? "She walked through the side gate when another parent was leaving." My heart was racing now. "Is Noah okay?" "Yes," the teacher said quickly. "We stopped her before she got very far." I grabbed my keys immediately. "I'm on my way." The drive to the daycare felt like the longest 10 minutes of my life. When I arrived, I saw 2 staff members standing near the entrance. And sitting on a bench nearby was Linda. The moment she saw me, she stood up like nothing unusual had happened. But the look on her face told me everything. She didn't think she had done anything wrong. And that was the most terrifying part of all. When I stepped out of the car and saw Linda sitting calmly on that bench, something inside me twisted. She looked completely relaxed, like she was waiting for a casual conversation. Not like someone who had just tried to take a child from a daycare playground. One of the teachers quickly walked over to me. "Noah is inside," she said softly. "He's okay." Relief rushed through me so fast my knees almost gave out. "Thank you." The teacher nodded and gently guided me toward the entrance. But before I could go inside, Linda stood up. "There you are," she said, like this was a normal meeting. I stared at her. "What are you doing here?" She looked almost offended by the question. "I came to get my grandson." "You are not allowed to pick him up." She waved her hand dismissively. The daycare staff misunderstood the situation. My heart was pounding now. "No, Linda, you misunderstood." Her expression hardened slightly. "I'm his grandmother, and I'm his mother." For a moment we just stared at each other. The daycare director stepped outside then, clearly trying to keep the situation calm. "We've already explained the policy," she said firmly to Linda. "You're not authorized for pickup." Linda crossed her arms. "I wasn't trying to break any rules." The director looked confused. "You walked through the side gate and called Noah to come with you." Linda shrugged. "I was just saying hello." I felt anger boiling in my chest. "No," I said. "You told him Grandma was taking him home." Linda looked at me like I was exaggerating. "Well, eventually he would have come home with me. You don't get to decide that." The director cleared her throat gently. "Mrs. Linda, I'm going to have to ask you to leave the property now." Linda didn't move right away. She looked at me instead. "You're making a big deal out of nothing." My voice shook slightly when I answered. "You tried to take my child. I was going to spend time with him. Without telling his parents." She didn't respond to that. Instead she sighed dramatically. "You've always been too sensitive." That was the moment something inside me snapped. For years I had tried to stay polite. Tried to avoid conflict. Tried to keep peace for Jake's sake. But standing there at Noah's daycare, hearing her dismiss everything like it was nothing. I was done. "You need to leave," I said. "Now." Linda's eyes narrowed slightly. "You're turning my own son against me." "No," I replied. "You did that yourself." The director stepped between us then. "Mrs. Linda, please leave the property. After a few seconds, Linda finally turned and walked toward her car. But before she got in, she looked back at me, and the expression on her face made my stomach drop. It wasn't anger, it was something colder, like she believed this situation wasn't over yet. Once she drove away, the director let out a long breath. I'm really sorry this keeps happening. Me too, I said quietly. She looked at me seriously. If she comes back again, we're calling the police immediately. I nodded. I understand. Inside the building, Noah was sitting at a small table coloring. When he saw me, he smiled. Mommy, I knelt down and hugged him tightly. Did Grandma come today? He asked innocently. My heart sank. Yes, I said carefully. What did she say? She said we were going on a fun trip, he replied. My stomach twisted. What trip? To her house. I forced a calm smile. Well, that wasn't the plan today. He nodded and went back to coloring, completely unaware of how serious the situation had been. But I wasn't calm anymore. Not even close. When Jake got home that evening, I told him everything. This time he didn't try to defend his mother at all. She went inside the playground. He asked. Yes. Jake paced the living room for several minutes. That's not okay. No, I said quietly. It's not. Jake stopped pacing. I'm calling her. The argument that followed was louder than any conversation I had ever heard between them. Mom, what you did today crossed a line. Pause. No, I don't care what you think you were doing. Another pause. You cannot go to the daycare anymore. I could hear Linda shouting through the phone now. Jake pulled it away from his ear slightly. I'm serious. More shouting. Then Jake said something that made the room go silent. If you go near Noah again without permission, we will call the police. The shouting stopped immediately. There was a long pause. Then Jake ended the call. What did she say? I asked. He looked shaken. She thinks you're manipulating me. I laughed bitterly. Of course she does. Jake sat down slowly. She says you're trying to keep her grandson away from her. I crossed my arms. She tried to take him from daycare. I know. Jake stared at the floor for a moment. Then he said something I had been waiting years to hear. I should have stopped this a long time ago. The next few days were tense but quiet. No visits, no phone calls, no car parked outside the daycare. It felt like maybe, finally, Linda had realized we weren't going to tolerate this anymore. But the truth was, she hadn't stopped. She had just started planning something bigger. The week after the daycare incident felt strangely quiet. Too quiet. Linda didn't call. She didn't text. She didn't show up at the house or the daycare. For the first time in months, it almost felt peaceful. But that peace came with a strange sense of tension. Like something was waiting just out of sight. Jake seemed uneasy too. Every time his phone buzzed, he checked it quickly, almost expecting it to be his mother. But it never was. One evening while we were putting Noah to bed, Jake sighed and sat down on the edge of the bed. I keep expecting her to show up again, he admitted. Me too, I said. Jake watched Noah for a moment while he played with his stuffed dinosaur. I can't believe she walked into the playground like that, he said quietly. Neither could I, but the thing that bothered me the most wasn't just what she did. It was the way she acted afterward. Calm, unbothered, like she genuinely believed she had done nothing wrong. 3 days later, the quiet ended. It was a Saturday morning. Jake had taken Noah to the park, and I was home alone cleaning the kitchen when someone knocked on the door. At first I thought it might be a delivery. But when I opened the door, my stomach dropped. Linda was standing there. She looked completely calm, like the past few weeks hadn't happened at all. Hello, she said. I didn't move from the doorway. What do you want? She sighed dramatically. I came to talk. About what? About this ridiculous situation you've created. I felt my chest tighten. You tried to take Noah from daycare. I tried to spend time with my grandson. You lied to the staff. They misunderstood. I shook my head slowly. No, Linda, they didn't. She crossed her arms. You're turning my own son against me. I felt anger bubbling under the surface again. I'm protecting my child. She leaned slightly closer. You're isolating him from family. You're the one causing the problem. For a moment neither of us spoke. Then Linda's expression softened slightly. Look, she said, we don't have to keep fighting. That sudden change in tone made me suspicious. What are you suggesting? I just want things to go back to normal. I almost laughed. Normal, yes, she said, like before all this drama started. Before the interview sabotage, before the daycare incidents, before months of manipulation. You mean before I started standing up for myself, I said quietly. Her smile faded slightly. You're overreacting. At that moment I heard a car pull into the driveway. Jake and Noah were home. Jake stepped out of the car holding Noah's hand. The moment he saw his mother standing at the door, his entire posture stiffened. Mom, Linda turned around quickly. Jake, perfect timing. Jake walked up slowly. What are you doing here? I came to fix this situation. Jake glanced at me, then back at her. What situation? Linda sighed again like she was the one dealing with unreasonable people. This whole thing with the daycare and the accusations. You tried to take Noah. I was visiting him. Jake shook his head. Mom, we already talked about this. And you're letting her poison you against your own mother, Linda said, pointing at me. Jake's face hardened. No one is poisoning me. She's trying to cut me out of Noah's life. You did that yourself. Linda looked stunned for a moment. Jake had never spoken to her like that before. You're choosing her over your own family, she said. Jake answered immediately. She is my family. The silence that followed was heavy. Linda's eyes shifted between the two of us. You're making a mistake, she said quietly. Jake didn't respond. After a moment, Linda looked down at Noah. Come here, sweetie, she said gently. Noah looked at me first. Then at Jake. Jake shook his head. Not today. Linda's smile disappeared completely. You're really doing this? Yes, Jake said firmly. You're not allowed to show up like this anymore. Her eyes flashed with anger. You can't keep him from me forever. Jake's voice stayed calm but firm. If you keep crossing boundaries, we'll get a restraining order. For a second Linda just stared at him. Then she laughed. Not a normal laugh. A sharp, bitter one. You think the courts are going to believe you? Jake didn't answer. Linda shook her head slowly. You have no idea what you're doing. Then she turned and walked back to her car. But before she got in, she looked back at us. And the expression on her face sent a chill down my spine. You can try to keep him from me, she said quietly. But this isn't over. Then she got into her car and drove away. Jake stood in the driveway watching the car disappear down the street. For a long moment neither of us said anything. Finally Jake looked at me. I think she's getting worse. I nodded slowly. I think so too. But neither of us realized just how far Linda was willing to go. Because only a few days later, she would try something that forced us to involve the police for the first time. The few days after Linda showed up at our house were tense. Jake and I didn't talk about it much, but we were both thinking the same thing. Things had crossed a line. More than one line, actually. She had sabotaged my interview. She had accessed my email. She had lied to the daycare. She had tried to take Noah from the playground. And now she was showing up at our house like nothing had happened. It wasn't just interference anymore. It felt obsessive. Jake started locking the doors more often. Even during the day. That might sound paranoid, but after everything that had happened, it felt necessary. 3 days later, the next problem started. It was early in the morning when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Normally I ignore those calls, but something made me answer. Hello, a woman's voice responded. Hi, is this Noah's mother? Yes, this is Officer Daniels with the County Police Department. My stomach instantly tightened. Is everything okay? Well, she said carefully, we received a call this morning requesting a welfare check. A welfare check? Yes. Someone reported that a child in your home may be in an unsafe situation. For a moment, I couldn't speak. What? The officer continued calmly. We just need to ask a few questions and confirm everything is okay. My heart started racing. Who made the report? There was a short pause. I'm not allowed to share that information. But deep down, I already knew. Linda. Jake was in the kitchen making coffee when I hung up. What happened? He asked. The police just called. Jake froze. What? They're coming to do a welfare check on Noah. His face darkened immediately. Let me guess. Your mom. Jake clenched his jaw. Unbelievable. About 20 minutes later, a patrol car pulled into our driveway. 2 officers stepped out. They were polite and professional, but the entire situation was humiliating. They asked to see Noah. They asked basic questions about our home, our routine, our parenting. Noah, of course, was completely fine. He was happily building a tower with his blocks in the living room. After a few minutes, one of the officers smiled. Well, everything looks perfectly normal here. Jake nodded stiffly. Because it is. The officer hesitated before speaking again. You might want to be aware that false welfare reports sometimes come from family disputes. I let out a quiet breath. That's what we figured. They left shortly after that. But the moment the patrol car disappeared down the street, Jake grabbed his phone. I'm calling her. This time the conversation didn't start calmly. Did you call the police on us? Pause. Jake's face twisted with anger. Yes, I know it was you. More silence. You reported that our son was unsafe. Another pause. I could hear Linda's voice faintly through the phone now. Jake shook his head in disbelief. No, Mom, you're not protecting him. The argument went on for nearly 10 minutes. By the time Jake hung up, he looked furious. What did she say? I asked. She says she's worried about Noah. That's ridiculous. She claims you've been acting unstable. I laughed bitterly, because I tried to go back to work. Jake didn't answer, but the anger in his eyes was obvious now. She crossed a serious line today, he said quietly. Yes, she did. Jake looked down at his phone again. I think we need to start documenting everything. What do you mean? Every call, every incident, every message. I realized what he was thinking. For a restraining order. Jake nodded slowly. I never thought it would get to this. Neither did I. But that afternoon something happened that made the situation even worse. I was checking the mailbox when I saw a thick envelope sitting inside. It wasn't addressed by hand. It was printed. From a law office. My heart started pounding as I carried it inside. Jake opened it carefully. The moment he started reading, his face turned pale. "What is it?" I asked. Jake slowly handed me the letter. It was from an attorney representing Linda. The letter claimed that Linda believed Noah was being kept away from her unfairly, and that she was considering filing for grandparents' visitation rights through the court. My hands started shaking. "She's threatening to sue us." Jake rubbed his forehead. "She thinks we're denying her access to Noah. That's because she tried to take him." "I know." Jake sat down heavily at the table. "I can't believe this. But deep down, I could. Because Linda wasn't acting like someone who wanted peace. She was acting like someone who believed Noah belonged to her. And the worst part was, she clearly wasn't planning to stop. Not until she got what she wanted. No matter what it took." When Jake finished reading the letter from Linda's lawyer, the house felt strangely quiet. Too quiet. The words in that letter kept replaying in my head. Grandparents' visitation rights, legal action, unfairly keeping her away from her grandson. It felt surreal. For months Linda had been lying, manipulating, and trying to take Noah without permission. And now she was acting like she was the victim. Jake sat at the kitchen table staring at the paper for a long time. "I never thought she would actually get a lawyer involved," he said quietly. I crossed my arms. "She's trying to scare us." Jake nodded slowly. "Yeah, but neither of us were fully convinced of that. Because Linda had already shown she was willing to go much further than we expected." That evening Jake called a local attorney just to ask a few questions. The lawyer explained that in our state, grandparents could sometimes request visitation rights. But the court usually only considered it if the child's parents were divorced, one parent had passed away, or the child was being harmed. "None of that applies to you," Jake said on the phone. The lawyer agreed. "So it's unlikely she would win," the lawyer explained. "But that doesn't mean she can't try." When Jake hung up, he looked slightly relieved. "But not completely. She probably won't win," he said. "But it could still become a legal headache." That night we added another step to the list of precautions. We informed the daycare about the letter. The director took it very seriously. "We'll make sure staff are extra careful," she said. "She is absolutely not allowed anywhere near Noah." For the next 2 weeks, things were quiet again. No phone calls, no visits, no car outside the daycare. At first I thought maybe the legal threat had scared Linda into backing off. But deep down, something still felt wrong. Then one Thursday afternoon, everything exploded. I was at home cleaning when my phone rang. It was the daycare again. But this time the teacher sounded completely panicked. "You need to come here right now." My heart started pounding instantly. "What happened?" "There was an incident with your mother-in-law." Every muscle in my body went tense. "What did she do?" "She tried to take Noah." The words made my stomach drop. "Again, what do you mean tried?" The teacher's voice shook slightly. "She came during pickup time and told Noah it was time to go." "But she's not authorized." "I know," the teacher said quickly. "But there were several parents picking up their kids at the same time." It was chaotic. My heart was racing now. "Where is Noah?" "He's safe," she said. "We stopped her before she got to the parking lot." I grabbed my keys immediately. "I'm coming right now." The drive felt like the longest 10 minutes of my life. When I pulled into the daycare parking lot, I saw something that made my chest tighten. 2 police cars. My hands started shaking as I parked. When I rushed inside, the front desk area was full of tension. The director was standing near the entrance. 2 police officers were talking to Linda, and Noah was sitting in a chair next to one of the teachers. The moment he saw me, he jumped up. "Mommy." I rushed over and hugged him tightly. "Are you okay?" He nodded. "Grandma said we were going on an adventure." My stomach twisted. I looked up slowly. Linda was standing across the room talking to the officers. But when she noticed me watching, she smiled. Like this entire situation was just a misunderstanding. One of the officers approached me. "Are you Noah's mother?" "Yes. We're trying to understand what happened here." The director stepped in quickly. "She attempted to leave with the child without authorization." The officer nodded and turned back to Linda. "Ma'am, is that true?" Linda looked offended. "I was just picking up my grandson." "You're not on the approved list," the director said firmly. Linda sighed dramatically. "This is a family matter." The officer's expression didn't change. Attempting to remove a child without parental permission is not just a family matter. For the first time, Linda looked slightly nervous. "I wasn't kidnapping him," she said quickly. "I'm his grandmother." The officer looked at me. "Did you give her permission to pick him up?" "No." The officer nodded slowly. Then he turned back to Linda. "Ma'am, we're going to need you to step outside." Linda looked shocked. "You can't be serious." But the officer didn't argue. A few minutes later they escorted her out of the building. I held Noah close the entire time. My heart was still racing. Jake arrived shortly after I called him. When he saw the police cars, his face went pale. "What happened?" "She tried to take him again." Jake looked like he couldn't believe it. The officers spoke to both of us for several minutes. They explained that since Linda hadn't actually left the property with Noah, the situation was complicated. But they still took a report. Before leaving, one of the officers looked at us seriously. "If this continues, you should strongly consider a restraining order." Jake nodded slowly. Yeah, after the officers left, the director apologized again. But I shook my head. This isn't your fault. As we walked Noah back to the car, Jake looked completely shaken. I never thought my own mother would do something like this. I didn't answer right away, because the truth was becoming painfully clear. Linda wasn't just interfering anymore. She was escalating, and if we didn't stop her soon, the next time might be even worse. The ride home from the daycare was quiet. Noah sat in the back seat talking happily about dinosaurs and playground games, completely unaware of how serious the situation had just been. But in the front seat, Jake and I barely spoke. Both of us were still processing what had happened. Linda hadn't just shown up again. She had actually tried to walk out with Noah while other parents were picking up their kids. If the teacher hadn't noticed, I didn't even want to finish that thought. When we got home, Jake locked the front door immediately. He stood there for a moment with his hand on the doorknob like he was trying to collect his thoughts. I'm done, he finally said. I looked at him. What do you mean? I mean I'm done trying to reason with her. He turned toward me. We're getting a restraining order. For a moment I just stared at him. For months I had been the one pushing for stronger boundaries while Jake tried to keep the peace. But now his voice was completely firm. She crossed every possible line, he continued. I should have stopped this a long time ago. That night after Noah went to bed, we started organizing everything. Every message, every email, every incident, the job interview sabotage, the email access, the daycare visits, the false police welfare check, the lawyer's letter, and now the attempted pickup with police involved. Seeing it all written down in one place made it even more disturbing. Jake looked at the list and shook his head slowly. I can't believe this is my mom. The next morning we contacted a lawyer. After reviewing everything, the lawyer nodded seriously. You absolutely have grounds for a restraining order. Jake leaned forward. What happens next? We file the paperwork with the court, the lawyer explained. A judge will review the incidents and may issue a temporary order immediately. And after that, there will likely be a hearing where both sides can present their case. Jake nodded. Let's do it. The paperwork took several hours. But by the end of the day, the request was officially filed. 2 days later we got a call from the lawyer. The judge approved a temporary restraining order. Relief washed over me instantly. What does that mean exactly? Jake asked. It means Linda is legally required to stay away from you, your home, and Noah's daycare until the court hearing. Jake exhaled slowly. Good. For the first time in months, it felt like we finally had some protection. But telling Linda about the restraining order was another story. She was served the paperwork the following afternoon. And she reacted exactly how we expected. She called Jake over and over again. 10 times in 1 hour. He didn't answer. Then she started leaving voicemails. The first few were angry. You're making a huge mistake. You're letting her destroy our family. You'll regret this. But as the messages continued, the tone changed. They became desperate. Jake, please call me. You can't do this to me. He's my grandson. Jake listened to the voicemails silently before deleting them. That night he looked exhausted. I never imagined things would get this bad. I sat next to him on the couch. You didn't cause this. He nodded slowly. But I should have stopped her sooner. The court hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks later. During that time, Linda wasn't allowed to contact us or come near us. For the first time in nearly a year, our lives were quiet. No surprise visits, no phone calls, no cars parked near the daycare. Just normal life. And it felt strange, almost peaceful, but we both knew the real confrontation was still coming. Because in 3 weeks, we would all be standing in a courtroom together. Linda would have to explain everything she had done. And for the first time, a judge would decide whether her obsession with controlling our lives had gone too far. What none of us expected was what Linda would do at that hearing. The morning of the court hearing felt surreal. For months our lives had been filled with stress, arguments, and constant fear of what Linda might do next. And now everything was coming down to one moment in a courtroom. Jake barely slept the night before. Neither did I. We woke up early, got dressed, and dropped Noah off at daycare before heading to the courthouse. The building itself was quiet and intimidating. Cold gray walls, long hallways, people sitting on wooden benches waiting for their cases to be called. Our lawyer met us near the courtroom doors. Just stay calm, he said. The evidence is very strong. Jake nodded, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. About 10 minutes later, Linda arrived. Seeing her there made my stomach twist. She looked completely different from the last time we saw her. Not angry, not dramatic, just calm, almost too calm. She was sitting with her own lawyer, quietly talking. For a moment she looked over at us. But she didn't smile. She didn't glare either. She just stared for a few seconds before looking away. Eventually the court clerk called our case. We all walked inside. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. The judge sat behind a tall wooden desk. Everyone else sat at long tables facing the front. The hearing started with our lawyer explaining the situation. He went through everything step by step. The job interview incident, the interference with my email, the repeated daycare visits, the false police welfare report. The attempted removal of Noah that involved the police. As each event was described, the judge occasionally glanced at Linda. But she remained quiet the entire time. Then it was her lawyer's turn. He stood up and cleared his throat. My client believes she has been unfairly cut off from her grandson. I felt my hands tighten in my lap. He continued, she admits there were misunderstandings, but her actions were motivated by concern for the child's well-being. Concern. The word felt ridiculous after everything she had done. Then the judge asked Linda directly, Mrs. Linda, do you understand why your son and his wife feel threatened? Linda stood up slowly. Yes, Your Honor. And do you believe your actions were appropriate? For the first time, Linda hesitated. No, that single word made the entire room go quiet. Even Jake looked surprised. Linda continued speaking. I may have crossed some boundaries. The judge raised an eyebrow slightly. Attempting to take a child from daycare without parental permission is more than crossing a boundary. Linda nodded. I understand that now. For a moment it almost sounded like she was accepting responsibility. But then she added something that changed everything. I was just trying to protect my grandson from bad decisions. The judge leaned forward. What bad decisions? Linda looked straight at me. She wants to go back to work. The courtroom went silent. Even the judge looked confused. That is not illegal. Linda shook her head slightly. Children need their mothers at home. Jake suddenly spoke up. Your Honor, this is exactly the problem. The judge looked at him. My mother believes she has the right to control our family. Jake's voice was steady but firm. She's been trying to force my wife out of our son's life since the moment she decided to return to work. The judge turned back to Linda. Mrs. Linda, do you believe you have the authority to make decisions about this child? Linda opened her mouth, then closed it again. That silence told the judge everything he needed to know. After reviewing the evidence for a few more minutes, the judge finally spoke. The pattern of behavior here is extremely concerning. My heart started pounding again. He continued, this court is granting a full restraining order. Relief washed through me instantly, but the judge wasn't finished. Mrs. Linda is prohibited from contacting the family, approaching their home, or going near the child's daycare or school. Linda looked stunned, and any violation of this order will result in immediate legal consequences. The gavel tapped lightly on the desk. Case closed. Just like that, it was over. Outside the courtroom, Jake let out a long breath. I can't believe it. Our lawyer smiled slightly. You handled everything exactly right. As we walked down the courthouse hallway, I realized something strange. For the first time in almost a year, I felt free. Free from the constant tension. Free from the manipulation. Free from the fear that Linda might appear somewhere unexpectedly. Jake squeezed my hand as we walked to the parking lot. I'm sorry it took me so long to see what she was doing. I shook my head. You see it now. He nodded. And I won't let it happen again. That afternoon we picked Noah up from daycare together. He ran toward us with his usual excited energy. Mommy, Daddy. Jake picked him up and spun him around. Watching the two of them laughing in the parking lot, I felt something settle inside my chest. For months Linda had tried to control our lives. Tried to break our family apart. Tried to convince everyone that she knew what was best. But in the end, the truth had won. And for the first time since this whole nightmare started, our family finally felt safe again. The first few weeks after the court hearing felt strange. For almost a year, our lives had revolved around Linda's constant interference. Every phone call made us tense. Every unexpected knock on the door made our hearts race. Every time the daycare called, I felt that familiar knot of panic forming in my stomach. But now, nothing happened. No calls, no surprise visits, no cars parked down the street watching our house. Just silence. At first it felt almost too good to be true. Jake and I slowly started relaxing again. The tension in the house faded. Even small things, like cooking dinner together or watching TV on the couch, felt normal again. One evening while we were cleaning up the kitchen, Jake looked over at me and said something I hadn't heard from him in a long time. You should start looking for jobs again. I blinked in surprise. You're serious? He nodded, completely serious. For a moment I didn't know what to say. After everything that had happened, I had almost given up on the idea of going back to work. But now things were different. Linda couldn't show up at my workplace again. She couldn't call pretending to be someone else. She couldn't interfere, not without breaking a court order. So a few days later, I opened my laptop and started applying again. It felt both exciting and terrifying, like starting a new chapter. 2 weeks later, I got a call. A marketing company about 30 minutes away wanted to interview me. When I hung up the phone, I just stared at Jake in disbelief. They want to meet me tomorrow. Jake smiled. That's amazing. For the first time since the original disaster interview months ago, I felt hopeful. The next day I drove to the office building early. My hands were shaking a little as I walked inside. The memory of Linda storming into my last interview was still fresh in my mind. But this time everything went smoothly. The interview lasted nearly an hour. We talked about my experience, my ideas, and my previous projects. When it ended, the hiring manager smiled. We'll be in touch soon. I walked out of the building feeling lighter than I had in months. Even if I didn't get the job, it felt like progress. That evening while Jake and I were making dinner, my phone rang again. Same number. I answered quickly. Hello, hi, this is Amanda from Brightline Marketing. My heart started pounding. We'd like to offer you the position. For a moment I couldn't even speak. Yes, I finally said, probably too quickly. Yes, I'd love to accept. When I hung up, I practically ran into the kitchen. I got it. Jake immediately pulled me into a hug. That's incredible. For the first time in a long time, things felt like they were finally moving forward. But a few days later, something happened that reminded us the situation with Linda wasn't completely over. It started with a letter. Not from a lawyer this time. Just a plain white envelope sitting in our mailbox. Jake grabbed it while we were bringing groceries inside. When he looked at the return address, his expression immediately changed. What is it? I asked. He turned the envelope over slowly. It's from my mom. My stomach tightened instantly. Should we even open it? Jake hesitated. Then he nodded. I want to know what she has to say. Inside the envelope was a single piece of paper. Handwritten. Jake read it silently for a few seconds. Then he handed it to me. The letter was short. Linda wrote that she was sorry for everything that had happened. She said she missed her grandson. She said she wanted to fix things. And she ended the letter with a simple request. She wanted to meet. Just once. Absolutely not, I said immediately. Jake rubbed the back of his neck. I know, but he didn't sound as certain as I did. She's trying to manipulate you. Again, I continued. She only sent that because of the restraining order. Jake nodded slowly. You're probably right. Probably. That word bothered me. Jake, I said carefully, she tried to take Noah. I know. She called the police on us. I know. She showed up at my job interview and tried to destroy my career. Jake sighed. I remember everything. For a moment the kitchen was quiet. Then Jake folded the letter in half. We're not meeting her. Relief washed over me. He walked over to the trash can and dropped the letter inside. But as he did, he said something that made my stomach twist slightly. I just wish she would finally accept that she can't control our lives anymore. The problem was, people like Linda didn't give up that easily. And a few days later, we would find out that the letter wasn't an apology. It was a warning. The letter sat in our trash can for less than 10 minutes before I pulled it back out. I don't know why. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the same feeling that had been warning me about Linda from the very beginning. But something about the letter bothered me. It didn't feel like an apology. It felt calculated. Jake was sitting on the couch when I walked into the living room with the letter still in my hand. You're reading it again? He asked. I just want to look at it one more time. He shrugged. Okay. I sat down and read through the short message again. The words sounded polite on the surface. She said she missed Noah. She said she regretted the way things had turned out. She said she hoped someday we could be a family again. But there was something strange about the last line. I hope you'll reconsider before it's too late. I looked up at Jake. Did you notice this part? He frowned slightly. Before it's too late. Yeah. Jake leaned forward and read the letter again. Maybe she means before Noah grows up and forgets her. Maybe, I said slowly. But the uneasy feeling in my stomach didn't go away. The next few days passed normally. I started my new job at the marketing company, and things were going well. The team was friendly, the work was interesting, and for the first time in a long time I felt like I was building something for myself again. Jake seemed happier too. Without the constant stress from his mom, he was more relaxed. We were finally starting to feel like a normal family again. Then Friday afternoon happened. I had just finished work and was about to leave the office when my phone rang. It was the daycare. My heart skipped a beat. Every time they called, I still felt that same rush of panic. I answered quickly. Hello, but this time the teacher didn't sound panicked. She sounded confused. Hi, we just wanted to confirm something. Confirm what? Your husband already picked Noah up today, right? My entire body froze. What? There was a short silence on the other end. You didn't ask him to pick Noah up early. No, I said immediately. My heart started pounding. Jake is still at work. The teacher went quiet for a moment. Oh, that single word made my stomach drop. What do you mean? Oh, well, someone called earlier saying they were Jake's assistant and that he had sent someone to pick Noah up because of an emergency meeting. Ice ran through my veins. And you believe them? No, the teacher said quickly. That's why we're calling you now. We told the person we would need to verify with you first. Relief washed over me so hard I had to sit down. Did someone show up? No, but they said they were on the way. My mind was racing now. Did they give a name? Another pause. Yes, the teacher hesitated before saying it. They said his grandmother would be picking him up. The room around me suddenly felt very small. Linda, I stood up immediately. Listen carefully, I said. No one picks up Noah except me or Jake. No exceptions. Of course, the teacher replied. And if Linda shows up, you call the police immediately. We will. I hung up and immediately called Jake. He answered on the second ring. Hey, what's up? Your mom just tried to get Noah again. The silence on the phone lasted a few seconds. What? I quickly explained the phone call from daycare. Jake swore under his breath. She knows there's a restraining order. I know. I'm leaving work right now. Me too. By the time we reached the daycare, my heart was racing again. But Noah was safe, playing with blocks in the corner of the classroom. The teacher walked over as soon as she saw us. She never showed up, she said. But the call definitely seemed real. Jake rubbed his face with both hands. She's testing the boundaries. I nodded slowly. She's trying to find a way around the restraining order. That night after Noah went to bed, Jake and I sat in the living room talking about what had happened. This is exactly why the judge gave us the order, Jake said. She's not stopping. I thought about the letter again. The strange line at the end. Before it's too late. Suddenly it didn't sound like an apology anymore. It sounded like a threat. Jake grabbed his phone and started dialing. Who are you calling? I asked. Our lawyer. Now. Yes. A few minutes later he hung up. What did he say? I asked. Jake looked at me seriously. He said if she tries something like this again, we can report it as a violation of the restraining order. And then what happens? Jake's voice was calm, but firm. Then she gets arrested. For the first time since this nightmare started, I realized something important. Linda thought she was still playing games. But now the rules had changed. And if she made one more move, it could finally destroy her. That weekend, Jake and I barely slept. Even though Linda hadn't actually shown up at the daycare, the phone call had shaken both of us. It proved something we were already starting to suspect. She wasn't finished. The restraining order hadn't stopped her. It had only made her more careful. On Monday morning, Jake dropped Noah off at daycare while I left early for work. The teachers reassured us again that they were being extra cautious. They had printed photos of Linda and placed them at the front desk with clear instructions. Do not allow this person near the child. Call police immediately if she appears. Knowing that helped a little, but the uneasy feeling still lingered. 3 days passed without any problems. Then Thursday afternoon everything finally came to a breaking point. I was sitting at my desk finishing a report when my phone buzzed. It was Jake. I answered immediately. Hey, his voice sounded tense. Are you at work? Yes. Why? I just got a call from the police. My stomach dropped. Why? They picked up my mom. For a moment I thought I had heard him wrong. They what? She violated the restraining order. I stood up so fast my chair rolled backward. What happened? Jake exhaled slowly. She showed up at the daycare parking lot. My chest tightened, but she didn't get inside, he continued quickly. The staff recognized her immediately and locked the doors. Then they called the police. And she stayed there. Yeah, Jake sounded almost shocked. She was just sitting in her car. My mind raced. Was she trying to take Noah? I don't think so. Then why was she there? That's the weird part. Jake paused. She told the police she just wanted to see him. Anger rose inside me immediately. She knew she wasn't allowed anywhere near the daycare. I know. What did the police do? They arrested her. The word hung in the air between us. Arrested. After everything she had done over the past year, it had finally happened. When is she getting out? I asked quietly. I'm not sure, Jake said. But the officer told me violating a restraining order is serious. I sat back down slowly. For months Linda had pushed every boundary. Sabotaging my interview, accessing my email, calling the police on us, trying to take Noah, threatening legal action, and now she had finally crossed the one line that had clear consequences. That evening Jake and I picked Noah up from daycare together again. The director pulled us aside before we left. She didn't even try to get out of the car, she said. She just sat there watching the playground. The thought made my skin crawl. Jake shook his head. I don't understand what she expected to happen. Neither did I. But the next day we got a phone call that explained everything. It was Jake's aunt, Linda's sister. She sounded tired. I thought you should know what's going on. Jake put the call on speaker so I could hear. Your mom has been telling everyone that you've been manipulated, his aunt said. Manipulated, Jake repeated. She believes your wife turned you against her. I closed my eyes. Of course she believed that. She's been saying that if she could just see Noah again, everything would go back to normal, the aunt continued. Jake's voice was calm but firm. That's not how this works anymore. There was a long pause on the phone. I know, the aunt said quietly. She needs help. After the call ended, Jake sat quietly for a while. Finally he looked at me. I spent most of my life thinking my mom was just protective. I reached for his hand. But this isn't protection. No, he said softly. It's control. The court hearing for the restraining order violation happened a week later. This time the process was much shorter. The judge reviewed the police report, the previous restraining order, and the daycare security footage showing Linda sitting in the parking lot. Linda tried to argue that she hadn't approached the building. But the judge wasn't convinced. The order clearly states you are not allowed near the child's daycare, he said. Linda looked smaller than I had ever seen her before. For the first time since this whole nightmare started, she didn't argue. She didn't blame me. She didn't accuse Jake. She just stood there quietly while the judge spoke. The final decision was simple. a larger fine, mandatory counseling, and the restraining order extended for several more years. When we walked out of the courthouse that day, the air felt lighter. Jake wrapped his arm around my shoulders. I think it's finally over. I looked at him, then at Noah walking happily between us holding both of our hands. For the first time in a very long time, I believed it too. Linda had spent months trying to control our lives, trying to decide what kind of mother I should be, trying to convince everyone that she knew what was best for our family. But in the end, she had lost the one thing she wanted most. Access to the family she tried so hard to control. And the biggest lesson I learned through all of it was something simple. Being a good parent isn't about control. It's about protecting the people you love, even when the person you have to protect them from is family.